let's get started. I'm going to just be talking about the 12 best books I read this spring so far. I don't know, maybe not best, but 12 great books that I think you would enjoy. I've got a range here, so we have some like just trade fiction, we have some like fantasy, we have some nonfiction, we have some old books, we have some new books. We've got really everything in between. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll have something that you can, go get at the library or go buy at a bookstore. First off, 3 books that I'm actually not going to talk about much. These 3 books I just read on a vacation recently, and I just posted about them in a Substack with like my detailed thoughts. So I'll tell you what they are. World War Z by Max Brooks, the zombie book. Guards by Terry Pratchett. And then I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. All of them were great, but I wrote a whole post about that. I'm not going to waste time talking about it again. On to the next. Number 4 out of 12 in no particular order. This is The Country of the Pointed Firs by Sarah Orne Jewett. And this is an old book. I don't know exactly when, late 1800s, early 1900s, something like that. I'll put it on the screen. It looks kind of like a big book, but it's really a collection of a lot of shorter books and stories. So The Country of the Pointed Firs itself is like 100 pages maybe. So what is it? What is The Country of the Pointed Firs? It is a novella about the main character, and she is a writer who is taking a summer in Maine. She just rents a little house, and she's trying to write a book. We don't learn much about what the book is about. She's staying with her landlady, basically, and they become friends. They make soup. Sometimes she tries to write a little bit. They visit some friends on a little island in the bay. They have a picnic. Not a lot happens in this book, is basically what I'm trying to say here. There's really not a lot going on. Do not read if you want like a thriller, if you want like a page turner. But do read if you want to sort of just be immersed in a place. I very much felt like I was in Dunnet Landing. One area of literature that I think people maybe don't realize they can read a book for this reason is just the sensory feeling. Like, I'm there, Plot is important, characters are important. It's really tiresome if there's not any of those things. But just reading passages where they are making a meal or smelling the sea, if it's done well, is really, really enjoyable. So this was a great read for me. Very peaceful book, very short book, worth a shot. Again, not a lot goes on, but if you're like me and your life has a lot going on, maybe you would like reading a book where not a lot happens. So that's The Country of the Pointed Firs by Sarah Orne Jewett. Okay, up next, we got a twofer. I'm going to do books 5 and 6 together. Liberation Day by George Saunders. And this doesn't have a cover. I lost the slip cover, but 10th of December by George Saunders. So these are 2 short story collections. So I'm going to just do them back to back. If you have never read anything by George Saunders, I'm quickly becoming a huge fan. It's different. It's very different. And you may bounce off it hard and you may not like it at all. But I just find it so fascinating. Every time I'm reading him, I just am like, oh, I didn't know you could write a story in that way. Some of them are misses. Some of them I didn't like as much. But there were enough in here that I was just floored by or just keep thinking about that I'd highly recommend you pick up one of the 2. What are these stories about? It's really honestly hard to say. Some of them are science fiction-y. Some of them are contemporary. But I think the unifying factor there between all of them is the writing style. Saunders plays loose and fast with point of view. So you're in different characters' heads. He's super fluid with his grammatical structure and his syntax. Like, it looks avant-garde. There will be times when he'll just have like a question mark in the middle of the page, and that's just what's going to happen. And it makes sense for what the character is doing and who the character is. So for example, the first story in Liberation Day, the title story, starts off and the POV is from a character who has basically had his mind erased, and he is serving as a decorative piece essentially in somebody's house in a world where people buy and sell other people to serve as decorative functions in their houses. So basically he's pinioned, is the word, on the wall of this rich guy's house, and he's cabled up and he sings what the guy tells him to sing. It's like a loudspeaker in the house. It's kind of weird, and you just discover that as you read the story. Who comes up with this? I don't know. But since the POV is from the guy who's pinioned on the wall, he's not describing it as you and I would see it. He's describing it from his own point of view with his limited information, which makes the stories a lot more interesting to read. If you've ever read maybe, I don't want to call any book bad, but if you've read a book that was very boring, I would bet a lot of it is just exterior narrator describing everything that they want you to think as opposed to somebody who's very skillfully as a writer putting you in the eyes of a particular character, and then you can infer what you think about that character in the whole world because you're in their eyes and you're looking out. So he's really good at that. That's just one example. Between the two, 10th of December and Liberation Day, if you had to pick one, I'd say 10th of December. I prefer the stories on that on average a little bit more, but they're both pretty great. One of my favorite stories in this, for example, is My Chivalrous Fiasco. My Chivalric Fiasco, my fiasco related to chivalry. And it's about a guy who works at an amusement park that is medieval themed, and I guess in the future. He has this moral dilemma that he's in. You'll read it and you'll find out. He's not sure what to do about it. But then at one point he ends up on this performance enhancing drug for as a performer. It enhances his performance as a knight in the theme park because he's supposed to be in character. And when the chivalry turns up in him because of the drug, it actually affects his judgment on what he should do in this sticky situation. So I don't know if I described that really well, but one thing I really like that Saunders does in there as a writer, to me personally, hilarious. I found I'm a sucker for when characters start to speak in like faux medieval language, like with random capitalized letters at the beginning of words, like slight misspellings, but in a modern setting. It just works really, really well. One of the stories in 10th of December is just one long email from a boss to his employees. Now, as the email goes on, you're like, wait, what's going on here? I'm going to stop talking about him because I got so many other books, but George Saunders, when he writes a short story, if you've never really gotten into short stories or they've just felt like worse versions of novels, I think you'll find when you're reading him, again, you might really not like it, you might bounce off of him hard, but if you do like it, I think you'll realize he's doing something with a short story that you can't do in a novel. He's not just making a shorter novel. He's writing something that you couldn't do in a novel form. So if you are trying to get into short stories and you're curious, I would say Liberation Day by George Saunders or 10th of December, also by George Saunders. Oh, and selfishly, before I mention the next one, if you have a great book recommendation, feel free to leave it in the comments. I've mentioned before, I think I don't have a TBR, like a to be read list. I feel like it turns it into a chore for me. But I do have like a big, what I would call like a big brain soup of just random words that people have thrown at me. So if you throw book recommendations at me enough, eventually maybe they'll stick and I'll see it in the bookstore and pull it off. That's how I found some of these books too. They just were floating around in my brain soup for a while. So I would love to hear books that you think are great. Okay, up next. Oh my gosh, I forgot about this one. Okay, this one, best of the bunch. Just phenomenal. This book is Crossing to Safety by Wallace Stegner. If I describe the plot to you, you'll be like, that's not interesting. Here's what it's about. It's about a couple, and the husband is in academics. Actually, they're both in academics, I guess, but he teaches at a school, at a college. And they're friends, another couple, who also are in the academic world. And it's about how their friendship is great and sometimes tense, and it's about their lives from like young adulthood to end of life. So on paper, that sounds pretty boring. Like, what's more fun than friends hanging out? Friends who are hanging out and also trying to get tenure. Like, it's not actually that exciting on that way. But if you've ever wondered, like, hey, should I chase my dreams or should I relax? Or if you ever wondered, how long can a friendship last? Or if you've ever wondered, like, hey, does my life have meaning or significance? I think you'd really, really, really like this book. I can't quite describe it better than that. I don't know who said it. I think it might have been Anne Lamott, but she said sometimes a book, it means what it is. Like you can't summarize it in a sentence and say, here's what the book means. It can't be reduced to a fortune cookie. So I feel that way pretty strongly about Crossing to Safety. I felt a lot reading this book. Maybe it is because I used to teach or because I like literature and they're literary, literature professors. I don't know. I have not enjoyed emotionally a book and the characters so much in a long time. I mentioned, I think in a video a while ago, it's a Ray Bradbury quote from Fahrenheit 451, where he talks about how great literature has a high ratio of truthfully recorded details of life per square inch. As in, like, when you look at the page up close and you read it, you see your life or other people's lives reflected back at you. So that can be true of, literary fiction. It can be true of sci-fi. It can be true of fantasy. It can be true of romance. It can be true of anything. And it can be not true of a lot of things too. But when you look at a book and you're like, whoa, that's how life is, or that's how life could be, that's a really wonderful reason to read a book. And this book is loaded with truthfully recorded details of life per square inch. Again, your mileage may vary. You may not be anything like these characters. But that's not really the point, is whether or not it's accurate to your life. It's more is accurate to how life on this planet is. And it's different for everybody. For example, there's this scene, they're retelling their meeting for the first time. These two couples, when they're really getting to know each other at a dinner party. There's this other couple that shows up. And this other couple, they're not that cool for whatever reason. It's just not going to work out. They're not going to factor into their life story. And then the main character narrator, he says, "It struck me then and strikes me again now, how instantly mutual dislike can make itself evident. Or was I only reacting to their indifference? They did not appear to value me, and so the hell with them." What's the truthfully recorded detail of life there? A couple. One, sometimes you meet people and you're like, we don't like each other, and it's obvious. And then in hindsight, you're also like, wait, maybe they didn't dislike me. Maybe I disliked them first, and so they saw that and didn't like me. And who can say? And that's really the question, who can say? Now, I feel like I'm already ruining the book by trying to break down what it means. And it's not like reality TV. There's not a real right answer. If you watch reality TV, they edit it so that you find yourself rooting for a certain character. Someone's the villain, someone's the hero. That's how it works. And in real life, there's people that are near and dear to you who bother you a lot. And there's people who don't bother you, but you don't become friends with for whatever reason. And that's how it goes. And so reading this book, there's a lot of that. But I will say it also has very satisfying, the arc of all of it does feel satisfying. It doesn't end in a weird avant-garde way where you're like, wait, what? And the author's like, yeah, that's real life. It is actually a satisfying book. So that's Crossing to Safety by Wallace Stegner. Up next, this is our first, I think maybe only, nonfiction book on this list. And that is The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. Now, I read some of James Baldwin's fiction before. I read Giovanni's Room last year, the year before, and very much enjoyed it. This book I found, I was waiting for my coffee at a coffee shop, and they had a little shelf, and I read 3 pages of the first part of the book. Then I left, and I ordered it later because I was so hooked from the first 3 pages. Now, what is this book about? It's about racism in America and across the world, I guess, and it's a tough read. It is a tough read. The Fire Next Time is broken into 2 chunks. The first part is a letter to his nephew, and the second part is an essay. And so again, nonfiction about the topic of race in America. And it's written in such a powerful way. It's just hard to put down. And I think depending on who you are and your background, right? Obviously I'm not black. I'm very white. Depending on who you are and your background and the way you've maybe been talked to about some of these things, your reactions may vary as you read. There might be something you're like, wait, what? Oh, an unfair claim. Or you may think oh, that's good, or, get them, or oh man, this is so sad, or all of the above. And I don't think that's the point. I almost never, when I recommend nonfiction, say oh, read this book because it prescribes something that I think you need to change your life about. That's a pretty rough way to recommend books, right? It's finding a family member who you want them to get in shape and saying, here, I sent you a video. It's called Eat More Vegetables. It's not really, it doesn't really work, first of all. And second of all, I don't think most books function in that way. Books are a way for somebody to say what they're thinking and for you to hear what they're thinking in a way where you don't have to say anything for a while, which is unusual for conversation, right? If you were sitting down with somebody and they said, here's what I think about something, you wait for them to finish, but usually you have to say something back. And so I find books are a really great way to encounter some harder to talk about topics in a setting where you can kind of collect your thoughts and be like, oh my gosh, I hadn't thought about it like that. What do I think? And then you can wait a while and think about it. For, the 103 pages that I read this, it's a very thin book, although pretty deep. For the 103 pages that I read this, I was in James Baldwin's shoes, or in his nephew's shoes as he was writing to him. But I don't want to talk about, I'm catching myself right now talking about oh, read this book because it's important. I think that's an unfortunate word. People maybe talk about certain books or movies. It's oh, it's so important. It deals with race or something like that. And that is true, but I think that would make it sound like it's being included on this list because it's just something we got to talk about. But I'd rather be reading, Ender's Game. And it's true. It fills a different role. This book, it's an essay on a social topic. But I have got to say, James Baldwin is a phenomenal writer. If you're not someone who reads essays or whatever, you might be like, who would read an essay? You'll read this one. Let me find something. Okay, this is nuts. I'm just going to read the passage and then I'm going to move on. He's talking about just the fact that life is tragic. And he says, life is tragic simply because the earth turns and the sun inexorably rises and sets, and one day, for each of us, the sun will go down for the last time. Perhaps the whole root of our trouble, the human trouble, is that we will sacrifice all the beauty of our lives. We'll imprison ourselves in totems, taboos, crosses, blood sacrifices, steeples, mosques, races, armies, flags, nations, in order to deny the fact of death, which is the only fact we have. It seems to me that one ought to rejoice in the fact of death, ought to decide, indeed, to earn one's death by confronting with passion the conundrum of life. One is responsible to life. It is the small beacon in that terrifying darkness from which we come and to which we shall return. And this is the kind of writer that James Baldwin is. So if you want 103 pages of that and you feel like you'd like to tackle some of that, it's your mortality, I recommend strongly. Great book, give you a lot to think about. Good book club book, possibly. Up next, on a complete opposite end of the spectrum, just a very, very chunky, not 103 pages, The Will of the Many by James Islington, I actually don't know. And this is a book I had heard about from my friend F.C. Schultz. He's a writer and also makes some YouTube videos on occasion talking about the writing process, books he likes, things like that. Great guy. But what is this book? Well, for one, it is huge. And for two, it is your typical, I don't know what the word is. It's not young adult, but it kind of is that typical, there's a guy in an unjust society. He is going to rise from the lower class to the upper class and take down the society, but there's some sort of magical element in it as well. So it's very much like your Red Rising, your Hunger Games type thing. Actually, if you've read Red Rising, it's really, really similar, specifically in the fact that the whole culture is Roman themed. So it's the future, but everyone has very Roman names. So in this system, the whole shtick, the whole gist, the will of the many, it's in the title, is the hierarchy. It is actually called the hierarchy. This is a fun read. This is not the most, I think, okay, pause. Man Caring Thing, I think, has a video recently where he just talks about how people group books into two categories and will call one of them literature and good books or trash books. It's like Ruth's Chris Steakhouse or Taco Bell. And I think that's a silly dichotomy as well. So when I say this is just a fun book and I'm making fun of the fact that it's called The Hierarchy. I read all 700 pages of this and enjoyed it. And I am not dissing it. And I am actually recommending it to you if this is the type of book you like. I think there's a time and a place for all sorts of different types of books. So time back in the hierarchy, which is, I'm thinking of
It's not a pyramid scheme. It's not even a scheme per se.
It is literally, the whole book is based on a magical pyramid scheme where everyone at the bottom of the society has to cede some of their will, their personal life force, to the next tier up. So if you are an octavi, I just read this word a lot. I didn't say it ever. If you are the 8th tier, you have to give half of your will to the 7th tier. So each guy in the 7th tier has 8 people giving him some of their will. So then the 6th tier and so on. So the guy at the very top is uber strong. They also use will to power machines and vehicles and things like that, magical objects. So this society literally runs on the backs of its lowest class, but everyone is participating in it because they hope they can move up and then drain other people. So obviously, in a book of 700 pages, somebody down on the bottom of the pyramid is not going to be happy with this, and they're going to want to change something about that. Phenomenal. As far as I was hooked the whole time, I was very much, I enjoyed reading it, even though you can kind of guess certain things that are going to happen, right? In a more traditional book like this that is genre-based, you have some things that should happen. I enjoyed it. I like seeing bullies in the school, the special school. Of course, there's a special school. I like seeing the bullies get what's coming to them. And I like seeing the surprise attacks happen. And I liked all of it. So if you are this all sounds great. I like reading. I don't think I can read Walden today, Tim. I just like reading sci-fi and fantasy, and that's what I get into. Or you just need a break from some other books. It's not, I don't know how much of a break it is. I guess it's 700 pages. But The Will of the Many is going to do that for you. And I think I'll probably read the sequel. I think it's supposed to be a trilogy. So there you go. Okay, 3 more, home stretch. Virgil Wander by Leif Enger. I thought it was Leif, and I found out it was Leif. And the reason I found out it's pronounced Leif, or I'm second guessing myself now, but I'm pretty sure it is because he actually came and did a visit at our library, and I got to meet him and talk with him about a lot of things, his book, and about Wendell Berry. So it was a huge win. Great time. The book he came to talk about was I Cheerfully Refuse, which you may have read as well. And I liked it, and I came to read this, Virgil Wander, because I liked the title and I liked the cover, which is enough of a good reason to read a lot of books. Okay, so what is this book about? This one is like contemporary fiction. Virgil Wander is the name of the main character. His first name is Virgil, his last name is Wander. It's a very poetic book in that sense, and he lives in a very, very, very small town in Wisconsin, and he runs a failing movie theater. He doesn't make a lot of money, and at the beginning of the book, he is just recovering from accidentally going over a cliff in his car into Lake Superior, one of the Great Lakes. He goes into one of the Great Lakes and he gets his life saved by a friend. And the rest of the book, he's kind of trying to figure out, like, who is this new me? Who is this new me that was born out of the lake? It's very quaint. It's very enjoyable. It's slow. There's kite flying. There's a strange Scandinavian friend who comes to visit. There's a disappearing person in a plane. I'd say it's like very much like a modern day Country of the Pointed Firs. There we go. I'm happy with that. Small town, sense of place, not a lot going on. A little more goes on in this book. There's a little more that happens. But if you're the kind of person who likes, you're not super into old books so much, you like to read newer books-ish, and you like stories, but you don't want to get too stressed out by crazy action sci-fi stuff happening, and you just want to have a good time, I'd recommend this. It's written very well, and I'm glad I read it. So, Virgil Wander by Leif Enger. Me Talk Pretty One Day by David Sedaris. David Sedaris, there we go. I really forgot I was going to be talking about this book today, and you can see the smile spreading over my face. This was the first time I had laughed out loud reading a book in a long time. I know because it was like 7:45 in the morning, and I was in a coffee shop, and I was sitting across from my wife, and I read a line in one of the parts of this book, and I just snorted. And she looked at me like, what's wrong with you? Like, it was not the time for snorting. It was a coffee shop at 7:45 in the morning. And it just caught me so off guard. I'm not going to read you the line here because the only reason it was funny is because I had read the 3 or 4 pages previous to it, and the sentence just caught me off guard. So you'll have to find out for yourself. But if you have not read anything by David Sedaris, he is hilarious. This book, and I think most of his books, they are nonfiction, technically. They are, stories about his life, but they're heavily fictionalized. I'm not going to say exaggerated in a bad way or made up like he's lying. I just mean they're not like historical accounts. They're like the best possible version of the story. It's like the fun cousin at Thanksgiving who can like tell the story, and maybe they stretch a couple things, but it's all because it makes a story better, not because they're trying to make themselves look good. Actually, Sedaris does not make himself look very good in this book all the time. There's a particularly funny one, I think. It's kind of dark, but like talking about his time as like a modern artist, like doing art exhibits when he was like super, super, super hopped up on all sorts of drugs at like a lower point in his life back in the day. And like, he's not making himself look good. This is not a book about some guy saying, through that dark time, I just knew I would make it. He'd be like, this is what it's like to do that. And it's not great, but it's funny. And he can make pretty much anything funny. So I'm not even going to try and tell you what happens in these stories other than that one I just told you, because I'm not going to do it well. The funny parts aren't really the stories themselves. Like, oh, he goes to France to look at a house. Like, that's not that funny in and of itself. It's the way he writes it. And some people just have a knack for telling stories like that. Like, a good comedian. It's not a funny story. It's just a situation we've all been in. But it's funny because they make it, all of a sudden you see the humor in it. He also has been in situations I have not been in, I've got to say. And those are funny too for kind of the opposite reason. Probably a content advisory warning, depending on, some of these earlier ones as well, I guess. But you can do your own research and see like, ooh, does this seem like the kind of book I like? This is a grown-up reading, but it's all told like in a classy way, I guess I can say. Very well done, very funny, and if you read it in a coffee shop at 7:30 in the morning, who knows? You may end up laughing out loud. Okay, and last but not least, this is kind of a segue into a video I want to do in the future, but I haven't quite got up the courage to do it. This is a book of short stories by Anton Chekhov, and the video I want to do in the future is an introduction to Russian literature and why you should read it. So if you have any interest in Russian literature, or you're not sure where to start, or you'd like to hear me talk about that, let me know in the comments below like what your questions are, maybe, and that would help me prepare for that video. But in the meantime, I have one short story out of here so far. I'm not done with it, but one short story out of here so far that I am in love with. The title story was good too. The title story of this book is called Ward Number 6. But the story I want to talk about today is called The Duel. It's almost a novella, honestly. It's like 100 pages, so it's pretty chunky. But what happens in The Duel? I think I'd be hard-pressed to find a better example, condensed 100-page example of what Russian literature is about, in my experience. I'm not an expert. It has a lot of very morally conflicted characters who are like, oh my gosh, I've done so many bad things in my life. I recognize they're bad. I'm going to keep doing them anyway. I'm wretched. Give me a drink. That's like the vibe. But this whole thing in the back of their head of like, but someday I'm going to get redemption. I'm going to be better. I'll pay my debts. Let me 500 rubles. I'll travel to Moscow. I'll send it back to you. And I really want to turn over a new leaf. But no one can seem to do it for most of the story. And then sometimes they can and sometimes they can't. So in this story, our main character, I'm trying to remember his name. All their names are a little hard for me to say, but our main character's name is Laevsky. He is living with someone who is not his wife, which especially, at the time is a tricky subject. It's a sore subject for a lot of the people in the book. And Laevsky is living with someone who's not only not his wife, but she is married to someone back in another town. So he's living with somebody else's wife, and everyone knows it too. Like, they're being very public about it. And her name is Nadyezhda. Okay, so Laevsky and Nadyezhda. He, though, on top of all of this, starts off the story thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm not in love with her anymore. I just want to be out of here. I just want to go to another town. I don't want to deal with it anymore. And he's telling this to another character, and the other character's like, what? what do you want me to do? He's like, you can't leave her alone. And he's like, I know. And that's his dilemma the whole time. He's very self-centered. He's like, I can't deal with it. I just want to be gone. And maybe not that exact feeling is relatable to you, but maybe you've had moments when you're like, everything would be so much better if I could just be in another city right now, like for the next year and nobody talk to me. Maybe you've had that feeling. So that's where he starts off. But he can't figure out how to tell her, hey, go back to your husband and you bore me, right? I mean, how do you say that? That's tricky. But he's not thinking about the harm it's going to cause her. He's really, really in his own head. She has her own set of conflicts and like moral dilemmas, which I won't go into because they happen a little later in the story. But basically, she is okay with him being angry with her and treating her poorly because she feels like it gives her license to behave poorly as well. And so they're both kind of in this miserable state of, neither of us are doing well, and we're both upset at each other. And both of us want to leave, but both of us don't think the other person will. Why is this a good book? So what really makes this book is the rest of the characters and how they interplay. I'm going to butcher the names horribly, but there's a guy named Samoilenko. Probably my favorite character I've ever read, like bit character. His thing is he's actually really sensitive and sweet, and he cares a lot about other people, but he's embarrassed of it. He doesn't like people to see that about him. So he'll say something really well thought out, and then he'll catch himself, and he'll say something rude to make up for it. He's trying to give advice to that main character at the beginning, and he says, of course it's difficult living with a woman you don't love, but you have to look at it humanely, Vanya. If it happened to me, I wouldn't even let her see that I no longer loved her. I'd go on living with her for the rest of my life. So he says that, and that's what he really thinks. But then he's like, oh shoot, they're going to think I'm like nice. I'm a soft guy. So it says, he suddenly caught himself ashamed of what he had said and added, but for all I care, women might as well not exist. The hell with them. And I'm just like, I've never heard of a character like that who's like, oh my gosh, people think I'm too cool. Let me say something out of pocket. That's one character. There's also a character, he's a zoologist, and he's very much of the opinion people who have poor morals should be eliminated. Like, when you're doing the world a service. Which the book is called The Duel. So if you can imagine at some point, there's going to be a duel between this man and Laevsky. And all sorts of other minor characters who just tackle the big questions of like, man, why are people so bad to each other sometimes? In all sorts of different ways. They actually physically hurt each other. They emotionally hurt each other. They judge each other. Why are people so self-centered? I've never seen a better group of more flawed characters who I cared about more in such a short book. That is one of the hugest reasons I like reading Russian lit, is because you see people at their worst and people who are really wrestling with what it means to be a person and to feel like you're sucking at it. But they're not nihilistic, at least not usually. There's usually some sliver of, here's how I can be redeemed. If you've read Crime and Punishment, if you've read The Brothers Karamazov, like that. So this is a very condensed version of that. The characters are easy to track, even though the names are kind of crazy. Enjoyable, short, condensed Russian literature. So if you've never made a step into Russian lit, I would recommend The Duel or another short story by Anton Chekhov. But that one was my favorite so far. Well, that's the 12. If you feel like those sound good, but I don't know if I have the energy to read, I'm feeling I'm going to end up just vegetating on my phone, which no judgment, I've been there, I am there all the time. If you just feel like you need a little bit of motivation before you pick one of those books, might I suggest one of these reasons to read videos over here. These are just short motivational videos that use quotes to encourage you to read. There's like 30 of them or something in there right now. I find them helpful for myself when I forget why I like to read and I'm like 3 hours deep on my phone. I watch one of these, even though I made it, and it reminds me, oh yeah, I like reading, and there's some good reasons why. So watch one of those, and then pick up a book, and let me know what you liked in the comments, if you've read any of these, or if you end up reading them. Happy reading, and I'm going to go and read a book now. See you guys.